Hi there and welcome to The Wrap, simple news updates for busy people, brought to you by myself, Verashni Pillay, and the rest of the Explain.co.za team. So, we finally have our freedom. You could almost hear the whole country breathe a sigh of relief on Saturday night when President Cyril Ramaphosa told us in one of his famous televised addresses that we're moving to lockdown level 2. After months of having almost no social contact, South Africans will finally be able to visit their families, socialize, drink, and smoke with some sensible restrictions in place. I'll get to this later, but firstly, how did this happen? Well, it's because South Africa has appeared to have finally reached its peak in terms of infections. This means that the number of new infections every day is slowly starting to come down. We are flattening that curve. And with our economy taking serious strain and job losses climbing, it was critical to allow business as usual to resume. So we get to leave the house. Sounds great, right? But not so fast. Government and experts are warning that a second wave of infections is highly likely if we do not act responsibly. We know, right? We're told to flatten the curve, not realizing there'd be more than one curve. COVID is just the gift that keeps on giving. So, just because some lockdown restrictions have gone away, that doesn't mean the virus has. Several countries, mainly in Europe, are already experiencing a second wave. Meanwhile, remember how New Zealand earned its prefect badge for its brilliant response to the pandemic? They managed to reduce their case numbers to 0 in double quick time. This was largely thanks to Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who we named as one of our favorite leaders recently. But now even the Kiwis are on lockdown again after the number of cases started to tick up again after possibly taking their foot off the brakes too soon. We still love you, Jacinda. But it's not just New Zealand. Spain too is seeing infections rise again after initially seeing a drop. There are worries that young people gathering in nightclubs may have led to this new wave of infections. Look, we like a good party as much as the next person, but seriously, Spain? Nightclubs? Really? And France is supposedly taking its second wave seriously by making mask wearing mandatory. But not everywhere, and definitely not in major tourist spots like the Eiffel Tower. Would you like some highly infectious virus or a croissant, madame? You do you, Europe. So please, South Africa, let's not get complacent like those other countries. The South African Medical Association says that our second wave is expected to take place within the next 8 to 12 weeks. Wear those masks, keep a safe hollering distance, and wash those hands. We can do this. So, more on level 2 being unlocked. Now, perks include legal cigarettes and alcohol served outside of a teapot. But how did we get here? We haven't seen the pandemic completely overwhelm the health system as we saw in certain European countries, and we reached our peak sooner than expected. Well, here's the thing. We tend to believe the worst of ourselves as South Africans. But hey, we managed to get a few things right here. As BBC's correspondent for Africa, Andrew Harding, noted, despite the many missteps and mistakes in our lockdown, it kind of worked. Here's what he had to say in a recent op-ed. For all the miseries I've seen here, South Africa is still doing a relatively impressive job at defeating the virus. The upward infection curves are starting to climb back down in most provinces. The death rate appears to have stayed surprisingly low. Heroic medical staff are managing in a very South African way to create some order out of chaos. Now, that was Andrew Harding from the BBC. South Africa's hospitals are also not filling up as quickly as we feared. There's actually extra beds available. This means that our health system can handle the pandemic better than before, even with the terrible challenges and the troubling state of some of our hospitals, as we've seen in media reports. So we should be proud, even with all the awful things that have gone wrong and the many mistakes that the government has made. As a society, we are getting there. Meanwhile, in case you missed it, here's what you can do and what you can't do when it comes to level 2, which kicks in from Tuesday morning. You can travel between provinces, visit family and friends in small groups, but only in groups of 10, and restaurants and bars can operate with no more than 50 people at a time. Nightclubs are still closed. Guest houses and B&Bs are open, but only 50 people are allowed at one establishment at a time. Airbnbs are also open. Alcohol and cigarettes may be sold, but you can only buy alcohol at a bottle store from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. from Monday to Thursday, but you can drink at a restaurant or bar any day of the week until 10 p.m. Gyms will reopen, but only 50 people will be allowed to work off their lockdown books at a time. Parks, beaches, and nature reserves are open, and concerts and entertainment venues can open, but only 50 people at a time are allowed in. So that's quite a lot. Life is pretty much back to usual. But here's what's still not allowed. You can't go outside without a mask, no international travel, no gatherings of more than 50 people, including at funerals and religious events, no spectators at sporting events, and no leaving your home between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. So that curfew is still in place. Okay, moving on to some other news briefs from around the world and right here in South Africa. Yesterday marked the passing of the 8th Marikana anniversary. That was when 34 striking mine workers were shot down by police during what became known as the Marikana Massacre. Now, we mourn the fact that there has been no real justice for the families of those workers or for those of the 10 people who died in the days leading up to the shootings, which happened on August 16, 2012. Those 10 people included police officers and security guards. But there's something to be said here for our refusal to forget as a society. In 2018, superstar Indian author Arundhati Roy visited South Africa and happened to be speaking in Joburg on the anniversary of the massacre. References to the massacre peppered the discussion given the timing. She pointed out that we are lucky that the South African media even reports on those mine-sanctioned murders that happened in South Africa, because in India, where she's from, massacres like that happen all the time, sometimes twice a year. But the press is largely silent because many of them are owned by the mines. So be grateful for small mercies, I guess. It says something about us, that we refuse to forget, that we fight for justice. So even though the Farm Commission into the massacre didn't lead to any arrests, we still demand that they should happen. Thankfully, civil society organizations like the Socioeconomic Rights Institute of South Africa and others are doing their bit to help the survivors and the families who lost their loved ones. They're also keeping the pressure on the authorities to do something about the culprits evading justice. Moving on to some Dakar news. While we were all carrying on with the business of, trying not to get infected by an incurable and deadly disease, some bright spark in cabinet quietly signed off on a new bill on the use of Dakar in our country. This proposed bill says you can go to jail for up to, wait for it, 15 years if you have more than 1 kilogram of cannabis or 9 flowering plants in your possession. Now look, it's highly unlikely that this ridiculous bill will get passed into law, especially considering they may have to start with arresting our finance minister first. Tito Mboweni often treats his Twitter followers to live updates of the giant cannabis plant he says that he found growing on his farm in Mahobaskloof. And it seems to have sprouted a couple of babies if recent photos are anything to go by. As he tweeted earlier this year in his usual tongue-in-cheek style, legalizing this thing equals more tax revenue. I need more tax money urgently. And then radical economic transformation, which is clearly a dig at the guys in red berets in Parliament. Meanwhile, is he or isn't he, rapper Kanye West insists that he's still running for US president, although given how irrational his behavior has been, we don't know what to believe anymore. But this week it emerged that Ye had indeed seen the inside of the White House recently to meet with Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. That's right, Kanye, who presumably would be running against Trump, apparently met with Kushner to talk policy. Now, apparently, Mr. Kardashian, as we like to think of him, has some good ideas about where the country should be headed, a White House aide told Al Jazeera. But if his previous comments are anything to go by, we'd beg to differ. He believes that a coronavirus vaccine would be, wait for it, the mark of the beast, and according to Forbes magazine, he's never voted in his life. Now look, Kanye has been in and out of the US presidential race for over a month now, making even more and more bizarre statements as time goes by. His wife, Kim Kardashian West, has said that the rapper suffers from bipolar disorder, so while it is easy to lampoon him, Ye's strange behavior is actually no laughing matter. We do hope he gets the help he needs, though, before taking on any more policy discussions in or out of the White House. From keeping up with the Kardashian West to keeping up with Eskom, there has been some confusion around Eskom's planned power outages. Shocking, right? The power utility recently introduced load shedding, it was last week, but backtracked on its decision a day later, saying the pressure on the generation system had eased so that no load shedding was to be expected on the weekend. On Monday morning, however, some areas like Soweto and Ivory Park in Joburg woke up without any electricity. Sigh. Now Eskom is back on the warning wagon, telling us the system is once again constrained for reasons, so maybe don't pack away those rechargeables and candles just yet. We've been here before and we'll be here again, but as upstanding pillars of our community, let's do our bit to reduce our power consumption. Over to Mozambique, our neighboring country, Islamic extremists have once again infiltrated Mozambique, this time at a port in the far north of the country, so it's not too close to our border, but it's chilling. Hundreds of people have been killed and thousands are fleeing the region, which means a new humanitarian crisis is very much in the cards. The country's troops have now taken position around the port, and The Guardian is reporting that South Africa is considering sending in troops to reinforce Mozambique's military response. Thankfully, our borders are closed at the moment, so that kind of helps. On to other parts in southern Africa. 2 weeks ago, the pristine blue waters around Mauritius turned black after a Japanese carrier ran aground on a coral reef, spilling over 1,000 tons of oil. Now, an international team raced to remove the remaining 3,000 tons of fuel in the ship's tanks before it broke into and spilled more oil into the water. They were largely successful, thankfully. Even so, the ecological damage from the initial spill is horrendous, as are the implications for the island countries' tourism-driven economy, food security, and health. Now, everyone's trying to help here. Countries like France and India have sent in military relief efforts, and thousands of Mauritians have volunteered for the cleanup effort, even collecting straw from fields and filling sacks to make barriers against the oil. It's really sad stuff, so let's keep them in our thoughts. On to more exciting news in Africa. Africa's first electric bus factory is being built in Kampala. Could this be the African answer to pollution and congestion in the continent's busiest cities? Electric buses will soon become the in thing in the overpopulated and polluted city of Kampala in Uganda. The East African nation is constructing Africa's first electric bus factory and is hoping to kick off manufacturing by July 2021. That's less than a year away. The government hopes that 90% of the e-bus parts made from steel, lithium, and copper will be produced locally. The only product it plans to import from China is a lithium-ion battery used in electric vehicles. So that's one up for innovation in Africa. Moving on to accountability in South Africa. Why have one car when you can have 35? Last week we told you there's a real fight back against corruption going on, and several high-profile investigations are on the go. Imagine our delight when City Press reported this week that the Special Investigating Unit confiscated, wait for it, 35 cars. Along with this, several properties, 2 farms, and 6 bank accounts from a former Transnet executive and his family. All of these assets are thought to be the proceeds of crime. That means stuff bought thanks to bribes paid by a Transnet supplier to this dodgy executive. So this executive was allegedly registered in the name, these cars and so on was registered in the name of this Transnet executive and his daughter. But why 35 cars? Were they planning a quick getaway and couldn't decide on a color? Were they confused about how to fill up at the garage and end up just buying a new car every time they ran out of petrol? So many questions. Moving on to the week ahead, the Zondo Commission of Inquiry into State Capture will get going again on Thursday with Brigadier Faris Ngube and Major General Jan Mabula taking the stand. A cross-examination of Robert McBride, the former chief of the Ekurhuleni Metro Police, as well as former KwaZulu-Natal Hawks head Johan Boyson, is also expected. We'll let you know if anything interesting happens and what you can make of it all. That's it from us. Remember to share the love, tell your friends to sign up for the updates at explain.coza/subscribe. Till next time, goodbye from me and the rest of the Explain team.